At his girlfriend's family party, the guy secretly snaps a photo of a man. But the moment the flash goes off, the man suddenly starts bleeding from his nose, and his pupils instantly change color. And in the very next second, he gets agitated and charges straight at him.
Get out! Yo! Yo! Get out!
In the chaos, the guests quickly work together to restrain the man and drag him away. But at that moment, Chris has no idea that this strange reaction will end up saving his life. After being treated by his girlfriend's mother, the man quickly returns to normal. Then her father explains to everyone that the man has epilepsy and the camera flash must have triggered it, causing him to lose control. But Chris knows very clearly that's not what epilepsy looks like. He shares his doubts with his girlfriend Rose, saying the party is starting to feel really weird and he wants to leave as soon as possible. But to his surprise, Rose becomes upset after hearing this, thinking he's looking down on her family and friends. That instantly puts Chris in a difficult position. What he doesn't realize is that, not far from them, a very unusual auction is quietly taking place. All the buyers are older, wealthy people, and what they're bidding on is a painting displayed beside Rose's father, and the person in that painting is Chris himself. That night, when Chris returns with Rose, most of the wealthy guests from the daytime party have already left. But at that moment, he suddenly notices something off about the way the two house servants and Rose's parents are looking at him. It's hard to explain, but it feels wrong. Late into the night, Chris is still lying in bed, unable to calm down. He keeps thinking about the man who suddenly went crazy at the party. The man moved slowly. His eyes were dull, nothing like a young person should be. And yet his partner was an older, rich woman, which just doesn't make sense. Even the maid in Rose's house. When Chris talked to her, she was smiling while tears were streaming down her face. The expression was honestly disturbing. The more he thinks about it, the harder it is to sleep, so he decides to go outside and get some air. But just as he steps outside and is about to light a cigarette to calm himself, he suddenly notices a dark figure sprinting toward him through the night. He lets out a breath of relief. It's just the male servant out for a run. But just as he starts to relax, he turns his head and sees the maid standing by the window, staring straight at him. He instantly turns pale with fear and runs back inside in a panic. What he doesn't know is that the maid can't even see outside. She's just standing in front of the glass, admiring her own face like it's a mirror. As Chris walks past the living room, the lights suddenly turn on. Seeing it's Rose's mother, he sits down out of politeness. But then she immediately asks him whether he believes she can help him quit smoking through hypnosis. Of course, Chris doesn't believe it. Hypnosis sounds like something out of a movie, but during their conversation, her voice seems to carry a strange power, slowly guiding Chris back to a painful childhood memory. Back then, his mother was in a car accident, but he did nothing, which led to her bleeding out and dying. Along with the steady, rhythmic clinking of the spoon in Rose's mother's cup, the young man starts to cry uncontrollably, and his body gradually stops responding. By the time he realizes something is wrong, an invisible force suddenly grabs him tightly and drags him downward into a bottomless void. As his vision follows Rose's mother, she grows farther and farther away. At that moment, Chris suddenly wakes up. It turns out it was all just a dream, but the feeling is so real that he can't calm down for a long time. When he walks out of the house, he happens to run into the male servant. To his surprise, the man immediately apologizes for scaring him the night before, saying he just likes running at night. This sends a chill down Chris's spine, because it means what happened last night wasn't a dream, including being hypnotized by Rose's mother. So he picks up a cigarette and smells it, and unexpectedly feels nauseous. Now he knows he really has to leave this place. Before leaving, he calls his friend and sends over the photo of the man who went crazy. Unexpectedly, his friend recognizes the man, but he's been missing for 6 months. Realizing this, his friend immediately urges him to get out of there. So Chris quickly packs his clothes, preparing to escape. But just then, the closet door in the room suddenly opens. Curious, he slowly walks over. Inside, he finds a red box, and when he opens it, he sees it's filled with photos of Rose. But as he flips through them, something suddenly feels off, because there are many photos of Rose with black men, and even the male and female servants from the house are in them. A strong sense of dread instantly rises in his chest. He quickly goes to find Rose and asks for his car keys. Seeing that he insists on leaving, Rose surprisingly starts searching through her bag. But now, even one more second in that house feels unbearable to Chris. So he tells her to look while they walk. But the moment they get downstairs, they see her brother standing at the door, holding a stick. Right after that, her parents also walk toward them with strange expressions. Realizing something is very wrong, Chris immediately shouts at Rose to throw him the car keys. But the moment Rose finds them, her expression suddenly changes.
You know I can't give you the keys, right, babe?
At that instant, Chris falls into complete despair, but in the next second, he suddenly dashes toward the exit. But then, that familiar clinking sound rings out again, and Chris instantly loses consciousness, collapsing straight to the ground. Meanwhile, when his friend can't reach him for an entire day, he suddenly remembers the photo Chris sent and quickly looks it up online. Unexpectedly, that man also disappeared after attending a gathering in the suburbs. Combined with what Chris said about being hypnotized, his friend immediately realizes how serious this is. He rushes to the police station and reports that Chris has been kidnapped and may have been subjected to some kind of horrific experiment involving hypnosis. However, after hearing the story, the three officers all think it sounds completely made up. With no other choice, the man decides to handle it himself. As soon as he gets home, he immediately calls Rose. Just as expected, she says Chris already left yesterday. He was hoping to get some clues out of her, but her next sentence completely stuns him.
I know why you're calling.
Why is that?
It's kind of obvious, don't you think?
So disgusted he feels sick, he immediately hangs up the phone. What he doesn't know is that Rose's parents and brother are all standing nearby, clearly treating him as their next target. At the same time, Chris finally wakes up from hypnosis. But the moment he opens his eyes, he realizes he's tightly strapped to a chair, completely unable to move. Just as he struggles desperately to break free, the TV in front of him suddenly turns on, and from Rose's grandfather on the screen, he finally learns the truth. It turns out Rose's grandfather created a bizarre surgical procedure that allows an elderly person's consciousness to be transplanted into a younger body. But before he can even process the shock, the sound of Rose's mother tapping the cup comes again. Very quickly, Chris falls back into sleep. When he wakes up again, another elderly rich man appears on the TV, and he is the one who bought Chris's body. He says that after taking over Chris's body, part of Chris's consciousness will still remain, but only as a spectator, unable to control his own body. At that moment, Chris finally understands. The man at the party who suddenly lost control and told him to get out was actually trying to save him. But clearly, it's already too late. Yet in this brief moment of clarity, he suddenly notices the stuffing he had torn out of the chair. Then Rose's mother hypnotizes him once again. Meanwhile, in the operating room next door, Rose's father has already opened up the rich man's skull. He then tells his son to go bring Chris over. But just as his son unlocks the handcuffs and is about to move Chris into a wheelchair, Chris quickly grabs a metal ball and smashes it straight at him. Then he pulls 2 pieces of cotton out of his ears. This is what he used earlier to fake being hypnotized. Back in the operating room, when Rose's father still doesn't see his son return, he walks out to check, but right at that moment, he soon staggers and collapses onto the floor of the operating room. Right after that, Chris doesn't pause for a second. He quickly finds the car keys and prepares to escape this horrifying place, but unexpectedly runs into Rose's mother again in the living room. Seeing that she's about to reach for the teacup on the table, Chris quickly knocks it away first. With her hypnosis tool destroyed, Rose's mother angrily grabs a fruit knife and stabs toward him, but Chris forcefully blocks it with his bare hand. Then, enduring the intense pain, he drives the knife hard into her neck. At this moment, Rose is upstairs wearing headphones, searching online for her next target, but the loud crashing noise from outside suddenly alerts her. She immediately grabs a shotgun and walks out of the room, but when she sees Chris driving away with the maid, she suddenly says something.
Grandma.
It turns out that while trying to escape, Chris accidentally hit the maid when she stepped in front of the car, so he drags her into the car, planning to take her along and leave together. What he doesn't know is that the maid's body has already been taken over by Rose's grandmother, and once they're on the road, the maid suddenly wakes up and lunges at him like she's gone mad. During their struggle, the car suddenly loses control and crashes off the road. In the end, the maid dies, while Chris narrowly survives. He immediately opens the car door, preparing to keep running, but just then, a gunshot suddenly rings out behind him. Clearly, Rose has caught up with a gun. Seeing this, Chris starts limping as fast as he can, but he's still tackled to the ground by the faster male servant. And that servant is actually Rose's grandfather. As Rose quickly approaches, at that very moment, Chris suddenly recalls the man at the party whose nose was bleeding. Then he immediately pulls out his phone, and as the flash goes off, the male servant pinning him down suddenly freezes, then slowly releases his hands. But by now, Rose has already reached them, and without hesitation, she hands the gun to her grandfather. Chris thinks he's done for, but in the next second, Rose cannot understand why her grandfather suddenly turns on her, but Chris knows exactly what's happening. Under the stimulation of the flash, the original consciousness inside the servant's body briefly regains control, but unexpectedly, the servant then pulls the trigger again, ending his own life. Clearly, he refuses to continue living as someone else's puppet. Yet just as Chris lets out a breath of relief, he suddenly realizes Rose is not dead. One of her hands is still reaching hard toward the shotgun, but just as she grabs it, Chris snatches it away and throws it aside. Seeing that everything is lost, Rose quickly apologizes to Chris, saying she had no choice in all of this, but Chris still places his hands around her neck. However, just as he's about to kill her, the sound of a police car suddenly comes from behind. Startled, he quickly stands up and raises his hands, and Rose also seems to see a glimmer of hope. But unexpectedly, the one who arrives is actually his friend. Luckily, his buddy is a traffic officer, and he found this place by tracking the phone's location. In the end, under Rose's desperate, pleading gaze, Chris gets into the car without hesitation and leaves this place.